Okay, welcome all. We'll make a start. Welcome to what is the sixth of my brown bag sessions on international maritime security law. Different mix of audiences for these things. Couple caveats I typically start with these. The first is I do assume a low level of knowledge for these, so you don't need to know anything about the subject to follow along. I do sort of build on the previous presentation, so there might be some things I just don't elaborate, but happy to explain afterwards. Second, and this is especially true for this morning, my position here is by no means to tell operational agencies how to do their jobs. This is just me feeding back what gets taught at the international level. Would welcome any reflections on sort of points of difference if you have them. Please keep questions to the end. This is unclassified, so it's going to be recorded and I can share it afterwards. But just keep any questions till the end of the presentation. Here's what I want to cover. Quite a lot to get through. I'm going to start with the international legal regime that regulates what the duty to render assistance at sea looks like and where that's come from. I'll talk a bit about an incident called the MV Tampa rescue and how that had quite a few implications for the drafting of international law. Look a bit at some contemporary challenges, particularly around irregular migration and how this doesn't quite fit with the way that the duty to render assistance at sea is drafted in international law. Then we've got some MNZ colleagues who I'd like to invite up near the end to explain a bit about the New Zealand context for this and how we carry out our obligations. So to start with, international legal regime, where does the duty to render assistance at sea come from? Broadly, it's a long-standing principle. It's been around for centuries. You can find some codification of this that's more than 1,000 years old. The principle being that if you're at sea, there's not a lot else out there, and if you get in trouble, it's just a moral expectation that you'll help. You get a bit of a tipping point in the middle of the 19th century with industrialization and the growth of commercial shipping, where there's kind of a critical mass of shipping out there, that lots of shipwrecks and collisions are happening. And then people started turning their minds to actually codifying some of this, putting it into writing and making it mandatory. And so we had a burst of attempts at drafting, I guess, in the first part of the 1900s. First with the 1910 Salvage Convention. In full, it's the International Convention for the Unification of Certain Rules of Law Relating to Assistance in Salvage at Sea, also called the Brussels Convention. Similarly, the Salvage Convention, we have the Collisions Convention, and then the 1914 SOLAS Convention. For those of you who are historically minded, you will have connected the dots. Bottom right, that's the Titanic. She sank in 1912, and so people thought it might be a good idea to have some regulations around responses. So SOLAS, Safety of Life at Sea Convention, 1914, but I'll talk a bit more about the 1974 update to that. Then the bits and pieces of this are provided for in the 1958 High Seas Convention, and now what's the governing constitution for the oceans, the 1982 UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. So minor revisions to those elements now incorporated in international law. I don't want to dwell on this slide too much, just to note at the top, I've mentioned three of the main international instruments, which are UNCLOS, the 74 revision to SOLAS, and 1979 International Convention on the Maritime Search and Rescue, or SARCON, as we call it. Then down at bottom, there's some non-binding instruments that have been developed as well by international bodies like the International Maritime Organization. So this is just guidance on sort of best practice, standard operating procedures, that sort of thing. Not binding, but it tries to bridge that gap between stuff that's drafted 40, 50 years ago before modern challenges were confronting operators. And then just in the middle there, that's a list of some of the major seagoing nations having incorporated search and rescue obligations into their domestic legislation. So some of the classic sort of large flag registries there, Singapore, Panama, the US, Greece, some of the obvious ones. So I want to start with UNCLOS, Article 98. By the end of these presentations, you probably would have gone through all of the articles in UNCLOS. Today's special treatment is for Article 98. There it is in full on the right with some pretty janky highlighting, apologies, but those are kind of the crucial parts I've tried to emphasize. On the left, I've pulled out what I think are the 5 sort of constituent elements of Article 98. So in order, those are first that flag states will require of shipmasters traveling under their flag that they provide assistance to people in distress. You'll see on the right that's immediately qualified, however, in 98.1, it says they must do so without, if they can do so without serious danger to the ship, the crew, or passengers. So it's not an absolute requirement, it's slightly qualified, and the shipmaster is required to exercise a bit of discretion about what's safe in the circumstances. Element 2, assistance must be given to all persons. So it's an open list, it's not specific just to seafarers as it was when it was initially drafted. It's open enough to encompass migrants in distress, for example. Third, shipmaster must be proactive and proceed with all possible speed. A fairly obvious one here, if you contemplate sort of the distances involved. Little factoid for those who aren't aware, it's a 1-to-1 ratio and not to a nautical mile. So 1 knot will give you 1 nautical mile of distance traveled. So if you travel at 8 knots for an hour, you'll go 8 nautical miles. But that doesn't even get us beyond our territorial sea, right? That's out to 12. So an hour is a long time to be waiting for rescue if you're treading water. So this requirement here, in legal terms, says no dilly-dallying. 4, in the case of collisions, the vessels involved must help each other. And then number 5, this is on the coastal states. They must provide for the establishment of search and rescue services, and I'll get into a little bit of what that means. So you can see various obligations on different parties, flag states, shipmasters, coastal states, all contained in Article 98. The second international instrument I want to talk about is SOLAS. I'm going to focus here on Chapter 5, Regulation 33. So this here is focused on shipmasters, master of a ship at sea. And in the next bit of highlighting, you can see it's regardless of the nationality of the people involved. So not just responsibilities in your search and rescue region or ships with your flag. And then I want to note that last bit of highlighting at the bottom, that's that shipmaster's discretion for what's safe in the circumstances. They may consider that it's either unreasonable or unnecessary to provide assistance. There might be something where 30 vessels in the region have been called on, and it might be unnecessary for them to go as well, and in fact unsafe if there's that many going. Unlikely, but that might be what something unnecessary looks like. But where they decide not to engage, they have to note that down in the logbook so it all gets recorded. And then Regulation 7 under SOLAS, this is on the coastal states. So this is the establishment of your search and rescue coordination responsibilities. Now I'll come to the third international instrument, which is the SARCON. In short, this does 2 things. It's a requirement for the establishment of search and rescue regions, and for a rescue coordination center that organizes or coordinates activity in this region. In distinction from the jurisdictional zones that I've talked about through most of these presentations, the territorial sea, contiguous zone, and so forth, the search and rescue zone isn't a legal jurisdiction zone that gives you sort of enforcement powers. It's a zone of responsibility for coordinating activity. On the right, that's the RCC New Zealand. That's based out in Avalon, so that's what our Rescue Coordination Centre looks like. So that's how we've given effect to these requirements under the SARCON. And here's a depiction of the regions. The left is a little bit better to understand, but you can see how vast this is, right? Going up past Samoa, out into the Tasman Sea, down to the Ross Sea and Antarctica. And then on the eastern side there, that's up against Chile's search and rescue region. So that's the part that New Zealand is responsible for. Just another note under SARCON, if you can find it, Chapter 4 has a pretty well-developed set of procedures that talk through sort of the phases of a response that start with uncertainty phase and alert phase and then the actual distress phase. And just some more detail now on IMO definitions, because all of that isn't entirely clear. An annex to SARCON talks about what a distress phase actually is. And it describes that as an incident where there's grave and imminent danger that requires immediate assistance. Okay, but what does that mean? Different states interpret that differently. The US and Italy say, for example, that a vessel that's unseaworthy, by definition, that's de facto in distress. You don't need a formal declaration from the shipmaster for that to be in distress. That's the state of the vessel. Greece, on the other hand, which is involved in lots of search and rescue in the Mediterranean, they say no, need to wait for the formal declaration from a shipmaster for distress to be engaged. Second, delivering the rescued people to a place of safety. There's lots of debate about what that means, what's safe, how far do those obligations go. There's a bit more elaboration on this given in one of those sort of non-binding guidance documents I spoke about at the start. This is the International Aeronautical and Maritime Search and Rescue Manual that talks about a place of safety as being a location where, in effect, the rescue operations have stopped. There's no immediate risk to the safety of life. Your immediate concerns are taken care of. There's food, shelter, and so forth. And then they're prepared for travel to the next place, which doesn't have to be their final destination where they originated from or whatever it is. It's just the next place they can be transported to. So this can be a vessel. A ship can be a place of safety. It doesn't have to be on land. So you can see a couple of gray areas there. It's not entirely all clear cut. So there's state practice that develops this. And the more modern phenomena of mass sort of distress incidents with maritime migration have shown how this is maybe an opposite to the initial drafting of legislation. You'll all be aware of the context for this, lots of different drivers for this kind of migration, political or economic instability, war, environmental factors. A lot of this travel actually happens to be along major commercial shipping routes. So there are merchant vessels in the neighborhood when these distress events happen. But typically it's involving old vessels that aren't seaworthy. They don't have proper equipment, proper engines or navigational equipment. So it's a pretty risky venture to start with. This now places an increased burden on coast guards and navies and those coastal states with search and rescue responsibilities to respond to these. It's not was initially contemplated under SOLAS, for example, but there are obligations that now engage responses. And so what we're seeing, for example, is even people who are in charge of migration ventures who might be human traffickers, they will declare distress, even if they're not in distress, because they know that doing that might engage states' obligations. So it's slightly mismatched. A couple of pictures just to evoke what we're talking about here. Again, you'll be probably aware of most of this, but just to evoke the chaos of what's happening here. This is from March last year in the middle of the Mediterranean. It's at night. You can see the vessel on the right-hand side there's overturned. Its props up in the air. Some people have life jackets on, some of them don't. Just chaos. This one's from May last year, again in the middle of the Mediterranean. That little rinky-dink thing on the left isn't going far. Pretty unsafe. So now the MV Tampa rescue, pretty signal event in how the law has developed. So the facts of this case of these. In August 2001, a Norwegian flagged container vessel, the MV Tampa, began a commercial voyage sailing from Australia to Singapore. Was under the command of a shipmaster and manned by a crew of 27. After 4 days at sea, Australian authorities requested that the shipmaster assist an Indonesian-flagged ferry boat, which was in distress in the Indian Ocean. The Tampa was diverted off its course, and the shipmaster and crew brought on board over 400 migrants. Some of these individuals required immediate medical attention. The shipmaster then proceeded to disembark the migrants at the closest port, which was in Christmas Island, Australian territory. But the Australian authorities denied access to the port. So Tampa remained anchored off the coast of Christmas Island for a further 8 days. The solution was worked out in the background, negotiating between the parties, whereby the migrants would be resettled. Many of them went to Nauru, and the Tampa was then allowed to continue on its commercial voyage. So in short, the Australian authorities said, you need to help pick them up, and then said, no, it's not our problem, you figure it out. So that inspired some revisions and some clarifications to what these obligations mean, how far they go. I'll try and do this briefly, but in short, there are two things that come out of this annexes to the SARCON. One is on an expectation that the shipmaster can be released of their obligation to render assistance when there's no longer a risk to the safety of those people who are rescued, and that they can carry on without much diversion to their course onto their commercial voyage. The second is emphasizing that responsibility of the coastal state to arrange for finding the place of safety. Now, a mix of contemporary challenges, mainly, this is that migration issue. That's the big one. But I've tried to draw up a series of boxes that aren't necessarily mutually exclusive. These things aren't always contradictory, but they do give a sense of the balance that is you try to strike with these factors and how they can often be in tension. Particularly with the intersection of maritime law and refugee law, that gets quite confusing here. There are obligations on ship masters and owners to pick up refugees and asylees, but there are no requirements on states then to take these people in. But the ship itself might no longer be considered a place of safety. If there are dozens or hundreds of people on board, there might not be adequate provisions. Having people in close quarters like that, they're often not on their best behavior. So there might be safety concerns. So what if the vessel can't disembark them, but it's not a safe place? This hasn't been worked out yet in international law. That's still a quandary. In the top left box, I've just put something there I won't delve into, but just in case people are wondering, what happens with that obligation in the territorial sea? Do you have a duty to render assistance in the territorial sea? Isn't it just another country's responsibility? That's answered under Article 18 of UNCLOS, the meaning of passage. Ordinarily, you have innocent passage through the territorial sea, and that travel must be, if you look at Part 2, expeditious and continuous, so you can't stop. You are, however, allowed to stop and anchor if it's part of a distress incident or for the purpose of rendering assistance. So they've answered that directly. Summary, I've covered sort of the origins of those three main international conventions, how the Tampa incident threw a bit of a spanner in the works, and some of the nexus of contemporary challenges and that not fitting quite cleanly with the way the law is drafted. NZ context I haven't got to next because I'd like to invite a couple of MNZ guests up to maybe answer questions or give a summary of some of the New Zealand approach. And I would like you to look upon this technological marvel. It's a massive QR code, but that will take you to the Guide to New Zealand's Maritime Security Arrangements. If you open that up and go to page 74 or 75, that'll take you to the Maritime New Zealand chapter on maritime search and rescue. So that's some context. While I invite our guests up, Dylan, Kate. Map.
Yes. So there's just a couple of things I want to say. Kate Weinberg, I'm the principal advisor from the Rescue Coordination Centre. So we're the people that affect the rescues when this kind of thing happens. A couple of things to point out. So this is
Away from the microphone.
point echo.
Okay.
For the room, please.
Sorry for the rest of the room. Kate Weinberg, Principal Advisor at the Rescue Coordination Centre. The point that I just pointed to there, sometimes when there is a ship that's asked for a rescue out there, the closest human to that is someone on the International Space Station. So that kind of gives you a bit of an illustration why the ability for us to redirect ships to go and effect rescues out that far is really important. And just to flip it around, you know, the Tampa was a ferry that had only 27 people on board. It was a massive container ship. We've also done rescues where there's been a one-masted yacht that's transiting from New Zealand to Fiji. We've had to redirect a cruise ship that's got 8,000 people on board. So there's international implications around redirecting those kinds of ships. Reinforcing the point that you made there, Josh, about when we're effecting a rescue, we can tell the master of the ship to go and pick these people up. We have absolutely no control over where it's going to go and where it takes those people up to rescue them. And more to the point, the ship that's left in the ocean then becomes a maritime hazard. So there's implications there around what happens with the hulk that's now floating around in the ocean. The other consideration that we've got there is the ships that are operating in these waters sometimes might be on, under Black Ops or some kind of security mission. So there's a little bit of considerations there around what that means from an international point of view. What did I miss?
I guess a couple of things. Like one of the sort of big things I think about it is that we have the coordination responsibility, and we have the infrastructure in terms of satellite ground stations and the Maritime Operations Centre with radio comms to pick up this information. But a lot of the cases, I guess, in some of those fishing ones and stuff in the smaller Pacific states, they don't have this equipment, and so we might be informed via diplomatic channels or something like that, and then we send someone up. And as you can see, our search and rescue region encompasses some sovereign states as well, so Tonga and Samoa, and the Cooks, which is a bit of a problematic one at the moment, but so it's not just about, you know, New Zealand Sea, it's not just about us, it actually covers a lot of protecting our Pacific colleagues. And I think that it's also probably quite critical to talk about how we work with the other regions, because obviously if a ship goes missing or is drifting, it might be, you know, kind of on the boundary between one of the other search and rescue regions. So we have to work really closely with all of them in order to coordinate our responses, and we rely a lot on NZDF assets to help us find things. But we also have, as part of our kind of coordination role, we have expertise in Avalon for things like drift modelling and stuff, so that we can say someone went missing at this location. We can look at the weather, we can look at the sea currents, and then we can determine sort of where they might have ended up by the time we're actually looking.
And ours is world leading. Like the Americans ask us for our drift modeling sometimes because it's so good. The PA, the most taskings the PA is doing for us at the moment is to go and look for people up in Kiribati, which isn't even within our search and rescue region. It's just because we are the preferred finder that I go to Australia, they come to us.
Cool. I'll just jump in with a couple points here as well. Just on that point about using defence assets, is there a question around, are warships required to provide search and rescue? The legal position is that yes, they are. It'd be quite odd to try the defence if we're on a military operation, or operational requirements mean we're not available. Particularly given defence or warships will be the most capable asset that might be in the region, more so than a commercial vessel. So there's an expectation that they would be available. That's in peacetime for sure. There might be different rules that apply in wartime, but they're not exempt as a class of vessel from the requirement to provide search and rescue. The other piece I didn't elaborate here with, this is under SARCON setting up the search and rescue regions. It's not just chaos. States are left to figure it out for themselves. It's actually quite deferential to coastal states' domestic circumstances. Do they have existing domestic legislation that has requirements already? What's their political situation? You know, their relations with their neighboring states. What are their resources? You're not expected to do everything. The RCC, their requirement is to coordinate activity. So if your state doesn't have the available resources, that's a legitimate coordinating activity to call on international shipping coming through that search and rescue region. That counts as your discharge of your coordination responsibilities. Any questions? Yes.
How do we end up with that chunk that covers Samoa, Tonga, Cook Islands when it's so much closer to Nandi and also locals?
So NADI actually comes under us as well. We have trained all the people and helped them set up their rescue coordination centre. It actually used to belong to us. But there's lots of reasons why. It's just the way it is now.
I think there's a big part of it is just the general resources kind of, right? Like we just have so much more resource than the Pacific states. You know, so we obviously pick it up.
For online, the question was, how come New Zealand's picked up that region up north near the Pacific Islands? And the answer is multifactorial, but largely driven by resources.
We also have Norfolk Island, which is Australian.
Enjoy your bedtime reading. Any other questions? I'm happy to share the slides or pick up any conversations afterwards. And I think it's recorded, so we can share that around as well.
Thanks, Josh. What's the next one?
13th of August, hot pursuit and the use of force.
I'm sure. Exciting. Much more exciting.
Great. Thanks all.
So we